The death of George Floyd and the protests since have reignited enormous questions about race and racism, inequality and discrimination in America. That is true as well for the work that we do, news reporting. There have been a number of developments on that front of late, including a decision by editors at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette to initially pull an African-American reporter off protest coverage following her tweet. Her white colleague also was warned about a tweet he made, but was not pulled off coverage until later. That and other incidents have crystallized some of the differences in the experiences of Black journalists as contrasted with their colleagues. We explore this and some of the larger issues behind all this with Dorothy Tucker. She's president of the National Association of Black Journalists. And Norman Pearlstein. He's the executive editor of the Los Angeles Times. And we welcome both of you to the NewsHour. Dorothy Tucker, you told one of my colleagues this afternoon, you said this has been a difficult time for Black journalists. You described them as frustrated and tired, angry and scared. That's a lot to carry around at a time when reporters are being asked to cover all of this.
Well, Judy, quite honestly, some of that is what we carry all the time anyway. But it definitely is harder these days. From my own personal experience, I can tell you in covering the protest, I worked over the weekend. I worked, 3 or 4 days in a row, and I'm asking questions of people and I'm interviewing people on this side of the brain. But on the other side of the brain, I'm thinking of my 28-year-old son who was traveling from Atlanta to Chicago driving and praying the entire time that he arrives home safely. That he doesn't get stopped by a police officer, that something doesn't happen to him when he stops at a rest stop. So this is something that we carry with us. When you're covering a protest like this and you have had experiences of racism, you have witnessed it, someone who has had a negative exchange with a police officer. So, this is what we live. And to have to now be wear both of those hats, it is frustrating, it is tiring, and at times, because you are in the middle of it, it is scary.
Norman Pearlstein, what are you hearing from reporters reporters who work for you who are African American?
Well, they are speaking very much about the same kinds of pressures and tensions that you were just hearing about. They are also commenting quite passionately about the fact that there are not nearly enough Black journalists working at the Los Angeles Times, and that puts an additional burden on those who are here.
And Norm Pearlstein, are there enough? And if not, why not?
Well, I think there has been a pattern of underrepresentation for a very long time in all of our publications in the U.S., but it has been especially true at the Los Angeles Times. We live in a progressive community. We live in a city that is 47% Hispanic, that has a very active Black population that is represented in politics much more than it is in journalism.
And Dorothy Tucker, how much difference, I know you have these discussions with colleagues, you certainly discuss it at the National Association of Black Journalists. How much difference is it believed that it would make if there were more journalists of color and more journalists of color in positions where decisions are made?
And that is the key, Judy. It's not just about having an increased number of journalists there. It is important that we see Blacks in management position so that the stories that we cover, I think you would see more equitable reporting in the stories that we cover, in the kinds of stories that we cover. I think for African Americans who are reporting, they come to the editorial meetings with ideas. They come with pitches, and oftentimes they're just not accepted. Perhaps if there were Black managers there, there would be a better chance of some of the ideas that they're having, the kind of stories that they would like to do, I think those managers would be more sensitive to that. I think just having more Black managers would mean that some of the missteps that we've seen, you would not see. You wouldn't see the case of what happened in Pittsburgh. You wouldn't see the headline that we saw in Philadelphia. You wouldn't necessarily see what we saw at the New York Times. The list is long. You need someone of color, an African American, at the table when decisions are made to prevent the kind of missteps that we have seen in the media recently.
One of the active debates we had over the past week was about the use of the word looting to describe the destruction of property and very much the feeling among the Black journalists at the Los Angeles Times, who frankly educated the rest of us to the fact that looting had a pejorative racist connotation, and that comparing it to the kind of behavior of the police and the kind of behavior that we witnessed really was a false equivalency, and yet it was one that we were making as journalists if you picked up a copy of our paper.
And so that's a great conversation to have. I mean, the word riot is very similar. There is concern that it is automatically labeled as a riot if it is African Americans who are protesting, but it's not labeled as riot when you see the same kind of destruction after a concert or after a sporting event. So there are words that have that association. So I appreciate the fact that you're having that kind of discussion at the LA Times.
It's a conversation about words. It's also, we're increasingly hearing this conversation about this traditional idea in the press of neutrality versus what some are saying now when it comes to subjects like race, where journalists are called on to speak with what they are calling moral clarity, Norm Pearlstein, even if that means they've stepped from pure neutrality into expressing an opinion. I mean, I guess my question is journalism changing in that regard?
Well, I think it's changing only in the expansion of the definition. We don't think twice about saying that anti-fascism would be part of our mandate as a journalistic institution. Anti-racism certainly should be similarly central to our core. I think that the danger is that we not only recognize the need to tell stories, but that we also need to have a moral purpose. Otherwise, I think that the freedoms that we get with the First Amendment are not deserved.
Dorothy Tucker, is what's going on today calling on us to re-examine, again, that traditional definition of journalism as all about neutrality?
I think what is happening today is more than anything calling on news managers and news outlets to just really pay attention to the varying voices in their newsrooms. When it comes to just whether we should, step over a line, I don't think anyone is asking for that. I mean, we're journalists, and we're going to be fair and we're going to be accurate. But at the same time, if the information that someone is putting out there is wrong, I think as journalists, as you well know, it is our job to point that out. If what somebody is saying to you is unfair and racist, as journalists, it is our job to point that out. And I think what you're seeing more today is that journalists are more comfortable in doing that. So I think that's where the change may be.
I think there is some parallel to during the Vietnam period, when journalists like David Halberstam were certainly letting their opinions into their journalism, and I think it was for the better.
It's a big subject, and we so appreciate both of you talking with us today. Norm Pearlstein, Los Angeles Times, Dorothy Tucker, reporter in Chicago and president of the National Association of Black Journalists. Thank you both.
Thank you.